And hello again from WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I'm Josh Manning, Deputy Managing Editor at the Western Journal. Joining me on the show today, Abby Liebing and her squeaking chair.
It's very squeaky. Sorry about that.
Abby's a reporter for the Western Journal, as is Grant Atkinson, who I always try to turn him into Grant Atkins.
That was good, though. That was good.
Or Atchison.
Yeah.
There are a number of variants that I use. But thank you for joining us.
Just
on
like COVID.
This Wednesday afternoon. Yes, Grant is just like COVID in so many ways. Pardon me. So we were sitting around the table this morning, mulling over the show, and we were thinking, honestly, we're a little over a year into Biden's presidency at this point. Maybe it's time to just take a look at foreign policy and what Biden has done around the world, where he has succeeded, not many places, and where he has failed, or at least has a whole lot of room for improvement. And we found lots of opportunities to talk about those things. So the show today is going to kind of be a wide-ranging, almost extemporaneous discussion about foreign policy, geopolitics, during the first year of the Biden administration, going into the second year, what we've dealt with and what we have to look forward to, or what we have to fear coming in the next year before the Republicans retake Congress. So there are lots of different places we could start on this. Let's kick it off, though, with Iran.
Yes.
Abby, you've spent time over in that part of the world.
Yes.
I think you were less in Persia and more in Iraq, weren't you?
I was just over the border.
Yeah. But you've spent time there, and I know you've been following that. Iran has been an unmitigated disaster, I think, for the Biden administration, because simply nothing good has happened there, and they're on the trajectory for a nuke. So let's bring us up to date.
Yeah, so the weird thing about the Biden administration is that almost every administration up to this point, you get in a new office and you look at the Middle East almost immediately, and you start game planning, like what's going to happen, what are we going to do, are we hands off, are we in?
Maybe I can build a legacy.
Yeah, typically, people tinker with it. The Biden administration just went the focus was to ignore the Middle East minus Afghanistan. Well, Afghanistan doesn't totally.
Well,
count.
they try. They've been trying to ignore Afghanistan,
but they completely ignored Iran until now, and then all of a sudden, Biden is like, okay, well, let's talk about resurrecting the nuclear deal, the 2015 Obama administration Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which, if you actually read it, is an awful plan, which is why Trump pulled the U.S. out of it, because it's basically shaking the finger at Iran saying, don't build nukes, and if you pinky promise us that, we'll lift sanctions.
That's what it always felt like, but the establishment really denied that.
The establishment completely denied it, but if you actually read the deal, that's literally what it is. But so Trump pulled us out. Biden is, in the wanting to build a relationship with Iran, is saying, let's go back to the table. The problem is that Iran refuses to even hold direct negotiations with the United States. And so these talks have been going on in Vienna for months. And literally, they're in two different rooms down the hall. Iranian diplomats will not talk to Americans. They have to be shuttled back and forth between Europeans.
They're so petty.
It's so
the diplomat class is
petty.
So petty.
And so Iran keeps saying, we're not going to do direct negotiations with you unless you promise us that this deal is really going to go through. And Biden, his administration is like, yeah, it's going to go through. But his diplomats are walking away from the table. We had 3 people just left the negotiation table. They were like, no, we're not on board with what's happening. We're walking away. And so it's just a stalemate. And, lots of people are stuck in the middle. The UK particularly is stuck in the middle. And they're like, great, we're at a complete impasse. And in the meantime, Iran is enriching uranium and it's building weapons. Good for us.
Yeah, good for us. And there doesn't seem to be, Biden doesn't seem to have any ideas for carrots or for sticks.
No.
He's not been able to offer them, either not able or can't offer them anything that will get them to stop doing what they're doing.
No.
And the stick that we've been using, which is sanctions, it's not tough enough. It's not hard enough to actually make them back off.
No, Iran does not care about sanctions. And I think that's something that like the American people, the voting population has to understand is that a lot of countries, especially something like Iran that has a very complex black market and political structure, sanctions do not really affect them. I mean, a little bit at certain levels, you know, you'll have inflation and all that sort of stuff, but it's not a big enough stick to hit them with, and no one wants to go to war with them. So you're just stuck in this weird twilight zone, and it's really, really messy, and it makes the U.S. look horrible on the international stage.
Yeah, I think it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it has to do with the media coverage, like you talked about. I think because this deal was first brought up under the Obama administration, which Biden was also a part of, it was covered as a good thing because anything that Obama did had to be great for the media.
Right.
Trump pulled out of it. Anything that Trump did had to be terrible, so it was horrible he pulled out of it. And now Biden wants to get back in it, so now it's good again. But the media has yet to actually understand what this deal is, how terrible it would be for, you know, America, that it basically allows them to build nuclear weapons and just in exchange for a promise that they're not going to destroy us or whatever it may be. It's a super weak deal. It's a bad idea. The media has lied about it. And now I think what you're seeing is that people, the voting population, are just ill-advised about the bill and what it actually says because nobody has told them the truth about it.
Right. And I think it's just kind of the symptom of a way bigger cause of just people do not know and are not informed about what's actually being passed in legislation, what deals are being signed internationally. And like not even lawmakers are reading what's going on. And the media certainly is not explaining it. And so you're working with a lot of ill-advised people on almost every single level, from diplomats and presidents on down.
Well, how can you when the omnibus bill is, you know, as tall as you are?
Exactly.
No human being can read that. Only lawyers can read it. We all know they're not human beings. But one of the things with the Iran deal that's so striking to me that nobody's talked about is if this was such a great deal, if this was going to change everything, why in the world did Iran not jump at the chance to get back into it? So if Iran's not interested in getting back into it, that means, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't that mean their behavior was going to be the same whether they were in it or not? The deal doesn't make a difference to them.
It doesn't make any
They don't
difference.
care whether they're in it or not. So that means their action was going to be the exact same regardless. Doesn't this actually argue that the deal was toothless originally?
Yeah, it does.
Because Iran doesn't care.
Iran's like, I don't care if we're in or out of it. It's fine, you know.
So, and they continue to refine. And I agree with you about sanctions. The issue I've had with sanctions for years is that the mullahs, I mean, they're living high, wide, and handsome. They're doing just fine. It's everyday people who get hit by the sanctions. The ruling class continues to be fine.
Absolutely fine.
And the ruling class in Iran doesn't care about the everyday people in Iran. They don't have any.
What ruling class does care about the people until they're ready to revolt?
Yeah.
You know, and while I think there probably is a place for sanctions in your arsenal as a nation state, you know, you look at what's happening in North Korea. And you read about the experiences people have there, and it's just brutal. I mean, they're eating the bark off of trees, literally, to stay alive. And so sanctions are hurting Kim Jong-un, and good for that. Anything that hurts Kim Jong-un does it not only make me happy, but it's also good for the people of North Korea. But this actually is hurting them as well. And that's another spot where Biden has done absolutely nothing. Now, you can say, oh, well, Trump buddied up to Kim Jong-un and nothing came of it. But at least Trump was trying to do something. Trump did learn out of it.
Right.
That, okay, this didn't work. You know, they said Nixon, what was it? Nixon was the only person who could go to China. It took Nixon to go to China, something like that. It took Trump to go to North Korea.
Yeah.
And it was probably worth it, but we did learn that, you know, that we did learn that there's not a clean way out of that. But it's not just Iran, and we'll talk about Afghanistan too. But shifting back toward Ukraine, we've got massive issues right there that we talked about on the show last Monday. But you've been following that, Grant.
Yeah, obviously, there have been so many foreign policy mistakes made by the Biden administration that they've started to pile up, and it's hard to keep them straight. An argument that has been made about Ukraine that we talked about a little bit on Monday that I think is interesting is that, we don't really want to start a war. We're not wanting to promote this idea that if Russia invades Ukraine, that we should start a war.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea.
But
Bad idea.
It seems like the Biden administration, at least from what they're saying, maybe has no problem with starting a war, or at least is not super concerned about it. They're saying that they're going to, act swiftly and justly against Russia if they invade Ukraine, but they haven't said anything about what those sorts of actions would do, what kind of, consequences those actions would have. And I think it's interesting because Ukraine is arguably not the biggest foreign policy threat to America right now. Many people would say it's China or North Korea or whatever it may be. Ukraine, the things going on in Russia and Ukraine are kind of not as pressing as those issues. I mean, they're pressing now given what's happening, but it's not as dangerous.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting yesterday, Candace Owens on her show was talking about this, and she was talking about why is it that the Biden administration seems to focus on Ukraine. They're ready to go. If Ukraine gets invaded, they're ready to go fight. They're ready to go against Putin.
Severe consequences.
But they haven't vowed these sort of severe consequences against other countries like China. Why?
Yeah, the place where we have absolutely no strategic interest. There are no U.S. interests in Ukraine.
None.
That's the hill we're going to die on.
So why
That's
is it that they're dying on this hill? And that's the question she was asking. And she kind of was guessing that it may have to do with the fact that, the Biden family has interest in Ukraine. And
who is this? Was this Marjorie Taylor?
Owens.
Oh, Candace
Marjorie
Owens.
Taylor Greene
Okay.
made the same point, a little bit more out there with her point. Candace Owens was kind of just bringing it up as a possibility, but I'm curious if you guys think that there's any truth to that, or if not, because it seems, like a stretch. Why is it that Biden is so interested in imposing sanctions on Ukraine, but not sanctions, but reacting strongly in Ukraine, but not in other countries?
Man, Ukraine's never had it so good. I mean, Trump was interested in them, providing them missiles.
Yeah.
They were at the front of the world stage. Now they are again. I mean,
Everybody loves Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of it?
Oh, goodness gracious. I'm not even sure. Part of it I really do think is almost random, of that it was like kind of right moment, right time for Ukraine, especially because NATO in its bleeding heart ideas is like, oh, should we let Ukraine join us or not? And then the US and Russia are obviously going to react strongly to that. But I mean, you can't deny that Biden does have a lot of interest there. He's been pretty embroiled in Ukrainian affairs and not necessarily politics, but a lot of business ventures. And so it's, kind of a bad look if he just ignores things.
Yeah.
So
do you think I tend to think this is more of a time slot issue. Essentially, Biden got a bloody nose in Afghanistan, and this is the next show that's on that night, and it's the Ukraine show, and so he wants to make a really strong showing. Is that playing into this a little bit?
I would think so. I mean, the Afghanistan withdrawal was just such, there is zero good, zero positive things that came out of it. And so it's like, well, okay, darn it, I've been ignoring my foreign policy for an entire year of my administration. I guess I should, I don't know, look at foreign policy. Ukraine.
Yeah, to me, that line of reasoning makes more sense than the business venture that has anything to do with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. Yeah. People are talking about that.
The U.S. military.
Yeah, I don't buy a lot of that, but I do think what you're saying about Biden, it's almost like a good cop, bad cop thing. Like, he played good cop in Afghanistan, he didn't do anything, and now he's like, people think I'm too soft, so now I got to go really hard. So he just goes all the way to the other side, and he's like, I'm gonna be super hard, and then that's not gonna be good either. That might start a war potentially. I mean, we're hoping nothing like that happens, but actions like that do have consequences. So I think he's just swinging back and forth, trying to find a balance, and he hasn't been able to.
So that was one of the, I think, useful things about the way Trump governed, and I think about the way Reagan governed too. You can call them cowboys or mercurial or whatever adjective you'd like to use.
Yeah.
But by never letting the other side know quite where they were, quite what they were going to do, they were able to keep them off balance, which traditionally has been sort of the way U.S. grand strategy works. We try to keep everybody off balance. That's how the British have done it, and I guess we learned it from them. The two oceans help. But to your point, by being so feckless and rolling over in Afghanistan the way Biden did, he showed the world something that really we did not need to show the world. And now he's trying to make up for it. And that's when you make enormous mistakes, when you overcompensate.
Because he's behind the eight ball now, and he's trying to make up for his previous mistakes. And that's when he's going to start. It's like, I'll make a sports analogy just because I know Josh loves these. It's like
sports ball.
It's like when you're in a football game and you're playing and the other team goes up 14-0 or something, then you start pushing really hard. You're like, oh, I really need to score. Or maybe even soccer is like a better analogy. You go down 2-0.
Soccer's never better than football in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not a sports guy.
Come on.
But clearly soccer is not better than football.
Oh,
sorry.
gosh.
Any sport, really, it works, but you can see you're in a hole in a game. You start pushing. You're trying to make up ground, and then you forget, the consequences of doing that. You go full offensive push, you're trying to score, and then all of a sudden you're giving up a goal on the other end because you're not focusing on that anymore. You're now focusing on just scoring, and you make it worse.
You're playing to not lose instead of playing to win. And he's got, it's no wonder Biden is doing this because, granted, he's been fixated on COVID, which it turns out was really bad, but it wasn't the existential threat that the media made it. I think the media is more responsible for that even than the left.
Yeah.
It's not the existential threat that they made it out to be, but that's where he's poured all of his resources. So now he's kind of coming up for air and realizing, oh gosh, everything up here is a mess. But he has to worry about, first off, he's got to worry about what's happened in Afghanistan afterward. John Bolton wrote, it was just right at the first of the year, he was writing over at The Hill, and he said that the White House conceded months after the withdrawal that ISIS-K was capable of mounting terrorist attacks against the United States would be capable in 6 to 12 months, and Al-Qaeda in 12 to 24 months. That's a huge problem. That's huge. Back to the year 2000.
Right.
We've been set back 20 years by this decision. And granted, this is Bolton writing this. Bolton would have us take over the world, and I'm about half of me sympathetic.
He
to
is
that.
an imperialist.
I've never understood the problem with empire, but as long as everybody wants to be part of it, it's when you have the Russian approach, the prison house of nations approach. That's when it's not good. But anyway, this is setting us back 20 years.
Yeah.
And the fanaticism there has not decreased. It has increased because of essentially the way things fight over there. You can be close to persuading somebody to come to your side, and then an airstrike kills his brother. And that dude's gone. And not only is that dude gone, all of his brothers are gone.
Yeah.
And his in-laws are gone. And so that's part of fighting terrorism. You've still got to fight it, even though it's going to multiply the threat. You still have to fight it. But man, we're just walking backward here.
It's completely backwards.
So past that, you also have to think of what Biden's trying to figure out with China. Mm-hmm. He knows they're the threat for the coming century.
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
least for now. So let me read you guys a story. I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts. This is the Daily Mail covered this today, and I just want your responses on it. This was Elizabeth Elkin over at the Daily Mail, UK Daily Mail. A retired military official is warning on Wednesday that China could claim salvage rights to an F-35 stealth fighter that crashed in the South China Sea earlier this week. China, and I'm jumping around here, but China's likely game plan will be to capitalize on its territorial claims in the South China Sea and claim it salvaging the craft for environmental reasons. The U.S. Navy termed the crash a landing mishap aboard the USS Carl Vinson. Salvage ships could take between 10 to 15 days to arrive. And at that point, recovery could take as long as 120 days. So we're not going to beat the Chinese to salvage.
So we're essentially trying to race them to get there, but we're not
right, and it's
win.
in their backyard.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So what do you make out of this, Grant? This seems like an unbelievably stupid situation. I've got a couple of ideas for why this is so bad, but do you have any thoughts? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
I think just as we go through this conversation, I'm not a foreign policy expert. I would say I'm probably the least well-versed on foreign policy of the three of us.
Well, I'm glad we have you on the show today.
But what I think as I go through, as we're talking about each of these different countries and how Biden has failed there, it seems in every case that he is reactionary. Something happens and then it's too late, and then he's like, oh shoot, I need to do something about this. I think it goes to the fact that America, he said this before, America is going to be back at the head of the table. We're going to be running things again. It's not like that. America has become an afterthought for many other countries. And it's like other countries act and then America acts. We're not in charge anymore. And I think that's the main problem with the Biden administration's whole approach to foreign policy, is that it's based on reaction rather than based on preparing for what could happen.
Yeah.
Right. It's like America is going back to its 20th century self of kind of being like the Johnny come lately to really big problems.
Yeah.
Which happened in both of the world wars. But then in reaction to that, in the later 20th century and going into the 21st century, politicians and the administrations were all of a sudden like, we've got to be on top. We've got to be proactive, which also, that's a double-edged sword. It got us into some real issues. But now it's like we're swinging back the other way, where it's just like, okay, we're going to just kind of sit back and watch Eastern Europe and China and the Middle East, and we'll come when we're really needed, when a genocide's about to happen or someone's about to start World War III. And I feel like part of that's a little bit of an inevitable reaction. Honestly, I think that's just kind of the ebb and the flow of foreign policy. But when you put it in light of the Biden administration, which is so weak and so behind the ball on things, it makes it much, much worse.
Yeah. So if you're going to be, maybe there's an argument, if you're going to stay at home and not engage, you better be strong, and people know that, man, when they intervene, we're in trouble.
Right.
But if you're going to hang back at home and be weak, then you're not a threat to anybody.
Exactly.
And if you're weak and you engage, you're still not a threat to anybody.
Exactly.
So is that a better world where the U.S. is more isolationist? What do you think? I mean, that's a perpetual question since the
the founding of the nation.
And I mean, really since the middle of the 20th century, where we were trying to figure out.
It's one of those things where I think principled, if you're just looking at the moral philosophy and the principles and ethics of foreign policy, isolationism is normally the best case for something like the United States. The problem is I think we've dug the hole way too deep in being the world police. We're so many decades down the road in that case that it's like, well, pragmatically, I don't think we're pulling out of this. I don't actually think it's possible, and it's certainly not possible with like a good route to go back to some sort of isolation.
If not us, who?
Yeah, without their causing massive problems.
Will China, I mean, is China ever going to keep shipping lanes open the way we do? Of course they're not. They're wildly corrupt.
No.
We're the only ones who enable international trade. Now, that's an interesting thought. The U.S. withdraws, doesn't police shipping lanes as much anymore than a lot of the actually, it's in China's interest to do that because they need those markets. But anyway, what's interesting to me is this line, China's likely game plan will be to capitalize on its territorial claims in the South China Sea. So the F-35 goes down in the South China Sea. As we know, and as probably most of you watching know, the Chinese have been literally building islands out in the South China Sea so that they can extend their territorial claims. And no one has stopped them. Barack Obama didn't stop them. Donald Trump didn't stop them. And Joe Biden sure as heck isn't stopping them. And that's an enormous, enormous problem. If we had actually stopped them from doing this and invading the South China Sea, it would be at least a little bit harder for them to have any kind of moral any kind of reasonable moral standing to say, oh, this is salvage
Right.
and fell in our territory. But think about the idea. They've pilfered so much from us already technologically, but imagine them getting an F-35.
Yeah, I mean, that's
terrifying. We spent billions of dollars on this stupid thing.
I know. We've built the F-35s. We're marketing them largely to the rest of Europe. The UK is buying them out to wazoo. It's like the hot commodity, and they're going to salvage it.
Yeah. And so they get all of the tech. The Russians would do this too. They get all the tech and none of the expense.
Yeah, they get all the tech. They get any sort of sensitive information on the programming systems, which there's sensitive information on every F-35 and every airplane program system. So they get to, have fun with that. And they also get to advance their claims territorially. And it sounds very old worldish, but whoever controls the seas is who's in power.
That's completely true. Well, that's been U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, it's always true.
And again, we get it sort of from the British.
Right.
I mean, you got this tiny island that's the sun never set on the empire because they were ruling across the world. They did it using the Navy. So I think this piece was from Foreign Affairs, if I recall, but it was rehashing some of Biden's failures over the last year, and a couple of lines caught my eye. The Defense Department top-line budget number of $715 billion actually represents a budget cut after you account for inflation. So it's actually a budget cut to the DoD. It focuses on research and development that will take years. To realize, while shortchanging investment in weapons and capabilities that are vital to the near future. Blah blah blah. The president's budget request for the Navy would also cut purchases of ships by $700 million and propose to retire current systems at a rate that would shrink the overall fleet. Purchases of combat aircraft would be cut by $3 billion, and the budget did away with the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. So in the midst of all of this, with China clearly advancing, we're cutting budgets, and we're doing it to the Navy of all places.
Right.
I mean, to your point a minute ago, I mean, Grant, is this a function of ignorance on the part of the Biden administration, or is it a function of in international terms, liberalism or idealism, where they just think, gosh, we'll all get along if, there's not a military out there? What is this?
I think it's a function of ignorance. And I also think it's another function of a media lie. The media perpetually has said for many years, we spend way too much on the military, which may be true in certain areas. But when it comes to, the actual fleet, the ships, the technology, those are the things we need to be spending money on. Maybe we can cut money other places in the military, but not on those things.
Right.
And I think the media has said, we should be using this money we're giving to the military for other things. We could be using it to solve homelessness. We could be using it to do all these leftist priorities. And that's just not true, but it's made people on the left, like Joe Biden, and people who I think are ignorant on how foreign policy works, I think he buys into that. He's like, I guess we are spending too much on the military. Maybe we should just cut it back. And he thinks that's going to please his party. He thinks that's the best thing for him politically. And so that's why I think he would be doing that, even though it makes no sense.
You think homelessness is bad now? Wait until somebody else rules the world, right?
Exactly.
So is this just foolishness, or is it fecklessness? What is it?
I think it's foolishness. I think it's what's the product of what I call being caught inside of bubble thinking. You get inside of kind of your own bubble of, generally the military, big bad military, corrupt, big bad military. We're getting involved in places we shouldn't be in. And so let's just slash the budget. It's pure ignorance in some sort of thinking, because you're stuck in some sort of la land thinking that, this will cause more peace if we cut the military. But no one
it doesn't.
It actually just causes more problems. And also, just on a domestic level, every administration, it's like a time old truth that you don't mess with the Pentagon, and you don't really mess. The military is its own separate thing, aside from Congress and aside definitely from the executive branch. And everyone has recognized that until Biden. he's all of a sudden messing with the Pentagon, and people are like, what are you doing? It's like, you shouldn't do that. We're supposed to be left alone with our own funding, and we'll take care of keeping you safe, and you can go ahead and mess up all the policies and laws, but just don't mess with us.
So we're 80 years now past, 75 years past World War II. I mean, have we just essentially forgotten the lessons there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I really think we may have.
We already know that the left hates history and they like to wipe out anything that they don't like. So, I mean, maybe they just actually have forgotten the lesson. I mean, I don't think that's so crazy that it could have happened. There's
been actually, physically speaking, there's a generational turnover. It is not any longer in the common memory. World War II is now a historical event. It's no longer like, oh yeah, my dad and my grandpa were in World War II.
Yeah, it's something that you learned in school or you read in a book.
Yeah,
but the people who are alive during it are dwindling fast.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're now 30 years out from the end of the Cold War. And so I think it's probably easy for people, especially younger people, to wonder, well, how in the world did we get scattered? How did we end up being the policemen of the world?
Right.
It's like, well, that's a function of trying to oppose Soviet communism. And so now we're in this position where we kind of prop up the rest of the world. And we are stuck. Yeah. And what happens if we pull back? And it's not clear. There's not a good answer to it. All right. So quickly, I didn't tell you guys I was going to do this ahead of time, but we're a year into the Biden administration. Predictions on foreign policy 1 year from now.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Grant, you go first.
I'll be a little bit optimistic. I don't think that, we're going to get into a war involving Ukraine and Russia or anything. I do think that there will be another debacle similar to the Afghanistan one in Ukraine. I think that Russia will invade Ukraine and that we will not be able to pull out, the people who are at the embassy, the United States citizens who are in Ukraine. And I think that there will be people stranded there just like there were in Afghanistan.
So a rerun.
Yeah, I think it will happen again.
Wow.
I would agree with that on the Ukraine front. I say overall, I think we can predict maybe one or two pretty major terrorist attacks coming down the line. I'm not going to be bold enough to just be like 9/11 2.0, here we come. Yeah. But I think we can expect that. On maybe on level of Paris attacks. So I think we can definitely expect that. And honestly, I think overall though, for the next year, it's going to be kind of like, when water's boiling in a pot and it kind of it gets there and you're like, oh, I think it's going to boil over. And then you grab it off, but then you put it back on and you do it again. Yeah. I think it's going to be replaying that over again with China, Russia, Ukraine, places in the Middle East, Iran. I mean,
so more of the same. We're in a cycle.
More of the same. It's just a cycle. And it's going to get boil, boil, boil. Looks like we're on the edge of getting into some sort of tiff. And then we pull off.
Interesting. So mine's probably a hybrid of your two takes. I agree. I think at least one significant terrorist attack on a scale that is larger than anything we saw during the Trump administration.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
That's what I would say. And that's interesting. You mentioned Paris. I'm going to say on the US side. I don't know. We'll see. Europe's a lot easier to access. Now, I'm not going to limit myself. At least one significant terrorist attack. Larger scale than anything that happened while Trump was president. I don't think Russia will invade Ukraine. I think they will keep essentially funneling money and fuel to the Russian dissidents in, Eastern Ukraine, and just keep stirring up trouble there. But I don't think there will be a flat-out full invasion. I think we will see ISIS and Al-Qaeda come back.
Absolutely. They're back. They're not coming. They're back.
Nothing will be done to China other than the little slap on the wrist for the Uyghurs, and the Uyghurs will still be in concentration camps.
He won't show up at the Olympics, so that's
he
really
won't show up at the
Olympics.
Olympics.
And so that's a big win for the Uyghurs.
Super huge.
They're still enslaved.
So there are a lot of people around the world who I think are waiting for a return. It's so funny. Back during the Trump years, they kept talking about, we need the grown-ups back in office again. I think there are a lot of people around the country, around the planet who are probably waiting for the grown-ups to get back in the Pentagon and in the State Department. Right. I mean, the State Department's full of communists anyway, but at least more reasonable communists in the State Department. And hopefully we will see that in 2022, but really in 2024.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's good. That was a wide-ranging debate. Hope you hung out with us for the entire time. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Remember, we're here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. If you're watching online, be sure to click the subscribe button. After you click that, there's going to be an option to click a little bell. Click that, and you will get notified every time we go live. Thank you for watching. Thank you for reading our articles at westernjournal.com. We could not do this without you. We are not funded by a billionaire. We are a small family-owned company. And your reading articles keeps us in business. If you feel led to contribute in a more direct way, that would be wonderful. If you don't, perfectly fine. Don't worry about it. If you do feel led to, however, you can go to westernjournal.com/join. That's westernjournal.com/join. There's several ways there that you can partner with us to get out the truth and to push back against the left and to champion conservative and Christian causes. Let's see here. I think that's it for us today. For Grant, for Abby, I'm Josh Manning. This has been WJ Live. We're going to see you Friday afternoon.